Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down two different severe weather outbreaks that'll impact the United States this week, one of which will be today in the southern plains, and another that'll be impacting areas from the Midwest back through the southern plains, a very similar area to what we just saw with that tornado outbreak a couple of days ago. I'll give you the latest breakdown on both of these storms and more in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today that will lead into that threat for severe weather over the next few days. First, beginning with the southern plains. That is where a low pressure system is beginning to form over the central and southern plains back through Kansas and Oklahoma. This is what's going to allow for a lot of strong southerly winds to bring a lot of moisture into areas like Texas and Oklahoma this afternoon, and as well as a medium low level jet which will help to rotate some supercells this afternoon. This is where we could see a mini severe weather outbreak later today. More details on that here in just a moment. On the other hand, a strong high pressure system is dominating the eastern half of the country. That is where we're really not seeing a whole lot today, which is really needed at this point after all the severe weather that we've seen over the last several days. Let's put that all into motion to give you an idea of what we're actually talking about across the country over the next few days. Beginning with today, there will again be a mini severe weather outbreak across the southern plains. I'll have more details on this here in just a second, but once we go into next week, closer to about Tuesday and Wednesday, that is when a strong low pressure system will begin to form over the central United States. We'll actually be watching for a small winter storm as well with this, but the more concerning feature is the threat for some significant severe weather. This could be fairly similar to what we just saw this past Friday with that severe weather outbreak across anywhere from the southern plains back through the Midwest. We'll be watching for some significant severe weather there. Once we go throughout Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, a line of storms will develop from Wisconsin all the way back through the Texas region, and eventually going into late Wednesday into Thursday. That is when this all starts to move off to the east, where we could even see still a little bit of severe weather still across the very southern tip there of the country, and eventually going into next weekend, things look to be calming down just a bit. But we have to get through these next few days because there will definitely be some pretty significant severe weather. Now, in terms of today, there is actually an enhanced risk of severe weather that does include a pretty large chunk of North Texas. This is going to be mainly for the threat of some large hail. However, the tornado risk has increased to a 10% probability within a 25-mile radius of a strong tornado or two. That will be in that black hatch shaded region, which does include the DFW Metroplex. The other big concern, as I just said, is the large hail threat. This is where we could see some significant hailstones up to baseball-sized hail. By the way, I will be covering this live later today if there is any significant severe weather, so make sure that you're subscribed down below and click the bell icon so you are notified when I go live for this. And as well as that, we'll be watching for a damaging wind potential, so some flying trampolines not out of the question. Just to the east of Fort Worth, that is where some significant damaging winds up to 80 miles per hour will be possible. So in terms of the timing for today, we'll be watching for storms firing up around 4 to 5 o'clock, many of which will likely become severe pretty quickly with the environment that we have. So by 5 to 6 o'clock, storms will be rolling through the Metroplex. Two different rounds of storms will occur. One will be this little area of storms here, and then we'll be watching for a second area of storms just behind it. The second area of storms here, this is the second area, will likely be the more severe of the two. This is where we could see some large to very large hail, damaging wind gusts, and as well as a few tornadoes. By 7 o'clock, storms rolling through the Metroplex, and by 8 to 9 o'clock, storms are starting to shift into eastern North Texas, and then eventually going closer to 10 to 11, all that storm activity will move into Arkansas and Louisiana, where that severe weather threat does remain fairly low. Now, Tuesday is a completely different story. We're watching for another large-scale severe weather outbreak, very similar to what we just saw this past Friday. This will include areas from anywhere in the Midwest back through the southern plains. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has gone ahead and changed the outlook a little bit. There are two enhanced risks of severe weather right now, one of which will be from Missouri back through Illinois, and as well as another one from northeast Texas back into southeastern portions of Missouri. We will be watching for the threat of significant damage, winds, large hail, and the threat for a few tornadoes, which a couple of those very well could be strong. This is going to be a very similar setup, and if not, it could even be a bit worse, depending on if all the environmental parameters are in place, one of which will be the jet stream, which this seems to be one of the biggest characteristics out of the system. This will be a negatively tilted trough as we go into Tuesday night. This is going to create more spin in the atmosphere with very strong southerly winds, which will lead to some more rotating supercells, and as well as much stronger stronger updraft. So we'll have to watch for the potential of very significant severe weather, as well as the threat for a very strong low-level jet. This is what helps to rotate supercells at the lower levels to increase that tornado threat, and the low-level jet is no joke. We'll be watching for a low-level jet very similar to what we just saw on Friday with winds as high as 60 to 75 knots. Now, that is a smidge weaker than what we just saw a few days ago, but it is still very notable because this will still be a very well cranking low pressure system with very strong low-level winds that will increase the tornado threat across a large chunk of the country. Now, the setup across the United States, I've been mentioning several times, is so similar to what we just saw on Friday, and I really mean it, because look at where the low pressure system is as we go into late Tuesday with this severe weather potential. It is right literally where the last severe weather outbreak was. That low pressure system was centered around Iowa and as well as Minnesota. It is in basically the same exact spot. The dew points are capped off at the same exact spot. The dry line is actually slightly further back to the west, but the dew points are going to be a smidge higher as well here across the country, which will actually increase the severe weather potential just a little bit. Now, I don't know if we get to a high risk of severe weather with this event, just due to the fact that all the environmental parameters might not be in place for it in comparison to what we just saw on Friday. However, we will still be watching for at least some significant severe weather across a pretty large chunk here of the country. And by the way, for this event, we are back to an extreme risk of flying trampolines, so keep this in mind. Make sure you take down the trampolines, or at least hatch them down to the ground so they don't fly away, because some significant damaging winds will definitely be possible across a large chunk of the country on Tuesday. Now, for the severe weather timing, we'll begin with the Midwest. This is where we could see some significant severe weather. Initially going into Tuesday afternoon and evening, that is when a few discrete supercells could develop. This is where we will probably see the most significant severe weather. Now, once we get closer to the evening hours, that is when a linear line of storms, which would be a squall line, will likely develop from the southern portions of Minnesota all the way back through the southern plains. This is where the damaging wind potential will be increased. Once we go into late Tuesday into Wednesday morning, storms will still march through areas like Chicago and back through the Ohio Valley, but the threat may decrease, since this could turn into an overnight line of storms, which we might get a bit lucky. Because of this being an overnight line of storms, we actually would have less instability to work with, which would lead to lesser severe weather overall, or at least less significant severe weather. So there is some good news there. But again, things could change as we get closer, so stay tuned and make sure you're subscribed down below. We'll keep you posted with the latest details there. For areas in the Ohio Valley as well as through the Mississippi Valley, again, a few discrete cells could develop back out to the west going into Tuesday afternoon. That is where the most significant severe weather will come out of. And eventually going into late Tuesday into Wednesday morning, that is when a linear line of storms will develop. That is where we could see some significant damaging winds and maybe a couple of embedded tornadoes in that line of storms. And eventually going into late Wednesday into Thursday, another line of storms could develop, and we could again see severe weather as we go into Wednesday. Also, for the southern plains, we'll be watching for some severe weather, primarily going into the overnight hours Tuesday into Wednesday morning. That is when another line of storms could develop. Just to the east of the Metroplex is where it's forecasted to develop. Damaging winds being the main concern, and that will eventually move off to the east. So we'll be watching all this very closely for you. So make sure again that you're subscribed down below. If you enjoyed this forecast, make sure to like down below, and as well as click the bell icon so you get notified with the latest forecast. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting.